Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Practical Planner Podcast. I'm your co-host, Thomas Kopelman, co-founder of AllStreetWealth and head of community at wealth.com. And I'm joined, as always, by my great co-host, Anne Rhodes, chief legal officer of wealth.com.
This is actually going to be a little bit different because I will be asking questions of you, Thomas. Normally, it's the other way around. You guide me through a conversation. Today, I'm actually hoping for some practical pointers that you can give to our listeners. And I'm curious myself because financial advisors are the biggest referral sources for an estate planner. And usually by the time a client comes to us, referred to us, they've already had some conversation with their financial planner, right? The whole point is that you noticed an issue, you gave them the idea that they should be spending those thousands of dollars talking to an attorney or, doing an estate plan in some other fashion. So, first question, when a client comes to you and you're not familiar with what they're bringing in, with estate planning, what are the things that you're looking for?
Step one is get their estate plan. I think as an advisor who works with accumulators, people who are a little bit younger, it's not common that an estate plan is done. I mean, it doesn't matter whether, I think there's a higher likelihood that they have an estate plan done if they have kids, but it's still really low. Like almost every client I come across does not have an estate plan unless they are an attorney or a sibling of an estate planning attorney, where it's really pushed on them. So I think like step one is get their estate plan if they have one. If they do not have an estate plan, get them to get it done quick. For me, like with some of my clients, even if they have a complex estate and we need to go through a regular estate planning attorney, do a bunch of stuff, I still push them over to wealth.com to get the basics done, because I can't sit here and be like, you have 3 kids, you guys don't even have a will or a medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, you don't have any of those basics done. So really step one is get their estate plan. And if they don't have one, it's push them to do it. I think the hard part as an advisor is that step one of financial planning. For some it is and some it isn't. I have a couple clients right now who the first phase of bringing them on is getting estate planning done. And I have other clients where they're like, we'll do it this year, but we have a lot of other things that we need to figure out right now. And we're going to start there, which is kind of the nice part of like, just go get a will done. You can do it in 15, 20 minutes until, 2 or 3 quarters down the line, we actually have time to really dive into the estate planning need.
Right. Something interesting you said at the beginning is you ask for the documents. If a client comes to you and is like, yeah, I got that done. Do you ever trust them that they did? And, what is it in like the documentation that you find interesting if they do have an existing estate plan?
Just going through and seeing what's in it, which is obvious, but like, does your estate plan, like we had one, I would say, to be honest, we've had 4 clients ever we've worked with that had an estate plan coming in to work with us. And of those 4, one of them had it done before they even had kids. So we went through there and we were like, looking through, like, you have 3 kids. And they're like, yeah, it's been a while since we've updated it. So like one is like, how is everything flowing? Who are the decision makers in this? There's certain people who it's their parents, and now they're helping their parents who are mentally not there. So I think part of this for me is just like extracting the info and saying, is this the way that you want it to be? Is it all the kids on here? Is it going the right way? Do you have the right decision makers on? Most people are going to have spouses for financial power of attorney, medical power of attorney, but like some of the other things, who are those decision makers and are those the right people?
It's funny that you should shame people for not having updated their estate plan after they had kids, because my estate plan actually doesn't name my daughter by name, the toddler who gave me this cold. But what I did do, because I actually made my estate plan, got it notarized 3 days before her birth. I knew she was coming. At this point, I was pretty sure. And but I didn't want to jinx it by having her named in there until she was actually born. And so I provided for future children in there. So I had like trust set up for her and everything else, but I just didn't name her. And so in this next update, I'm looking forward to adding her name. So yeah, clients,
But I think that's a good point that a lot of people don't realize, is that is a way around it, right? You could pre-kid say, hey, in my estate plan, I want things split equally between my future children. Yes, you can update it over time, but like, I don't know. I've seen that not be included in estate plans. I think maybe sometimes it's a sales tactic of like, when you come back and have kids, we need to update your estate plan. But that is a way around it that I think a lot of estate planning attorneys do use.
When you talk about estate plan, are you solely focused on like the will, the trust, that like main legal document? Or are you taking like a more holistic view? And if it's the latter, what are the other things that you're considering?
I think phase one is like those basics. And I think for clients that are not ultra high net worth, a good portion of the estate planning role as a financial advisor is everything flowing through to the right places? Is it going to the right people? Do we have the right decision makers? Are things, if you have a trust, are the things titled in the trust that need to be in the trust? Are beneficiary designations right? Did they flow through to each spouse and then to the trust? I think that's a big part of like, I think estate planning 101. And then every few years you review that to make sure those things make sense. I think for me, with some of the higher net worth clients we do, we're actually doing some of the estate planning and doing the education on the tools. And I think that's really my job for multiple reasons. I think one is then when they go into the estate planning attorney, they're educated on the options that might make sense to them. I'm not telling them, hey, you for sure should use a SLAT or you for sure should use a GRAT. Like, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't do that. But on top of that, I'm just letting them know and spending time educating them on those tools. So when they go to sit down with the attorney, it's not first time they've ever heard of these things or thought about these things. And perfect example is we were working on a client recently. Family's very high net worth. Let's say they own a company in a different country, close to $1 billion in revenue. He's going to be very wealthy. And one thing we were talking about the parents is that they should set up an irrevocable trust for him for blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go into personal details. His parents were not about it. His parents were fine gifting money. They were fine doing everything, but they did not want to set up this irrevocable trust. So it's good for us to be able to bring it in front of him talk to his parents not be on board, and then we can go back to phase two, but then we can go to the estate planning attorney and say, hey, I know that was an idea you brought up. After talking about it, that's just not something that they really want to do. So let's not waste a meeting going over why this is good. They know why it's good. They don't want to do it. Let's start to think through some of those other things. So I think for me, I think part of my role is actually like quarterbacking this. Like, I am spending time in between meetings with my client and the estate planning attorney with the estate planning attorney, educating them, informing them, talking about things that we're thinking about, talking about what's most important to them. Maybe it's a loophole, but attorneys never charge me for this. So I think it probably reduces fees for my clients as well. But I think those are definitely some big parts of the roles that I play.
You work with some very kind attorneys. I will tell you, if every time that I had a conversation with a client's financial advisor, I didn't bill them when I was in private practice, that I would not have been able to charge the $40,000 for the plan that I did.
Totally. I mean, I get to pick the network of attorneys we use. So it's definitely helpful that I think part of them is if you're going to refer them multiple sets of clients, they want things to be good with you. And I use it as part like an education tool too. Like, there's a lot that I can learn through brainstorming with them. And I've also found a lot of attorneys that do flat fee packages too. They do, hey, it's going to cost this much to get all these things done. And so they're fine on the coordination and the conversations.
So let's talk a little bit about clients that do bring kind of legacy planning to you that involve more than just, your typical like succession planning, the will-based plan or the trust-based plan. What do you do when they bring in like any type of irrevocable trust? It could be something formed by their parents for them, or it's an islet they form for themselves, anything like that. Like, how do you approach that?
I would say it's still less common for me. We definitely have some clients in this situation. I think step one is just like understanding the why between what they did. Sometimes people don't know, right? If it's from your parent, you might be like, this is what they told me was right. This is what they got told 30 years ago was the right thing to do. But we have some other higher net worth clients who have done some interesting estate planning moves that I wouldn't recommend. And I know the attorneys that I talk to wouldn't necessarily recommend either. So I think step one is, what was the point of this? When somebody advised you to do this, what was the goal out of it? And figuring out, okay, great. Is there maybe better ways to do this now? And some of the irrevocable trust, there's no changes that we can make. But I'm thinking of a client that we're talking to potentially bringing on if we're kind of at the last stage, and he's like a quarter, 250 million net worth. So there's a lot of new planning things that we can do. And we say like, you did this early on, totally fine. It's not going to hurt you. Probably not going to help you very much either. There's no change that we can make. Here's the new tools that we're starting to think about. But for me, it's been very rare to come across situations where you've done everything you were supposed to do. Here's all the irrevocable trust that were done. There isn't any future planning. Well, let's just understand that. And in that situation, there still is planning around taxes that needs to be done as well.
Right. So here, I'll jump in and say a couple of clients come to mind where they had legacy, wealth transfer planning. And then we had to involve the financial advisors in a very big way to look at what tools they had available to them in the future. And so a couple of thoughts, we had clients who came in with ILITs or GRATs. GRATs are formed to be these days, I think 95% of them are zeroed out GRATs, meaning it didn't use any of their gift tax exemption. And so these clients came in being like, I'm all set, I did my planning. And it's like, the ILIT is kind of, it was there because you were at a point in time in your life where the ILIT made sense, but it's really not fully utilizing your tax exemption at this point, right? You need like a slightly more powerful trust or more powerful tool. For the ultra high net worth, clients, when they come in and they're saying, I want to use my tax exemption before it halves on January 1st, 2026, you look at that GRAT and you're like, the GRAT did nothing to use your tax exemption. It was a zeroed out GRAT, right? Like the whole point was you use $0 of your gift exemption. So you're looking at clients who kind of like may or may not have understood what they were doing, and then having to kind of power up their wealth transfer. Of course, this is for, a subset of clients who are very wealthy, but like in your example, the $250 million client, they have a whole slew of tools available to them. The second example that I can think of where, we do a lot of collaboration with the financial advisor is where cash flows come in. So you can have a client who comes in and they have slats, because slats are very popular right now to fully utilize your tax exemption. You set up a slat for your spouse sets up a slat for you. The issue becomes, these slots are grantor trust. Your clients are still on the hook for any of the income taxes generated within the slat. And then you're talking about, did they leave enough in their own names to continue paying the taxes? And if they didn't, then they need to call upon the slat to give them the distributions they were set up to give. But do those distributions, like how do they come up? Who's the trustee who's going to need to sign off on that? What are the assets that the slat is going to use to distribute, so that you can pay income taxes, which need to be liquid assets like cash? All of that becomes very difficult. And this is where a financial advisor needs to work with the attorney to figure out what you do with cash flows. And then lastly, financial advisors know what the assets are. Lawyers oftentimes don't. They know generally what the value of things are. They may have formed some of those family limited partnerships or things like that. But the overall financial picture of that client, where the liquidity is, that's the financial advisor's job. And so as an attorney, we really depend on financial advisors to do the first stab at giving us a balance sheet to say, hey, we want to do some really cool planning, but what are the assets we're even going to use, right? Because the family home may not be appropriate. It might need to be the stock or something else.
I think you made a bunch of interesting points there. I think this is all like collaborative, right? Like the estate planning attorney probably can't do this alone. The financial advisor for sure can't do it alone because they can't draft these documents. There's a lot of planning, right? Anything that we are advising clients on that are going to be estate tax beneficial are going to have a lot of planning that needs to be done of you don't want to move too much. You need to be able to fund the rest of your life. Estate taxes matter, but you've also made a lot of money, and like enjoying your life also matters. Like it's not only about minimizing taxes if you have to give up a lot of the things that you care about in life. But I think going back to some of your examples here, it is our job to know. Like I talk about GRATs with a lot of clients, and I think GRATs, even though it's zeroed out, can still be a great strategy tagged on to some of the other ones. Even if you don't use the exemption, it also can make sense to use a GRAT. 2026 comes along, you've already used all of your exemption. That's a really great tool. But I'm also thinking about like, okay, maybe you had a GRAT the last couple of years, it's expiring this year. Do you think those are really that good of high growth assets? They might be really great in your irrevocable trust to use this up and get a lot of that growth outside of your estate anyways.
For sure. But the point of this is, as a financial advisor, we've talked about some pretty complex transfer strategies, but also just the basics, right? Like client walks into your office and just doesn't have an estate plan. Like you can start anywhere along that journey, depending on your own comfort level and, with education, not giving legal advice, but education sensitizing your client to some of these possibilities. And that just, you can decide where your comfort zone is within that range.
Yeah. And I think some of the other things to think about is I think as an advisor, my job is more than looking at the estate plan. It's also knowing some of these numbers, right? So looking back and like, how much of your exemption have you used, right? Or like, hey, I have clients who their parents gifted them houses, right? How much did your parents use? We talk about, hey, you're planning for your kids. You super funded a 529 3 years ago. How much more room do we have left to contribute this year? Hey, you're pretty high net worth. Let's talk about gifting, right? Are you using the full amount of gifting, the $18,000 from each spouse to each kid, grandkids, et cetera? I think there's a lot of other things to think about beyond the estate plan that are really impactful financial planning moves. Like if you have clients who are going to be over the estate tax exemption, gifting 18,000 from first spouse to multiple people is a really great move that's going to save a ton in taxes over their lifetime. That is something a financial advisor should be talking about with their clients yearly.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, we wanted to keep this episode a little shorter, a little more digestible. And so, this is kind of where I think we've given you some ideas of how you could play a role by bringing in estate planning as a conversation topic with your clients. But there's so much more, right? That you could talk to your clients about. This happens to be our first episode, kind of giving you some practice pointers for your own book of business.
Yeah. And I think it might be helpful for like a quick recap of just like things to go through. So I think step one, check their estate plan. Do they have one? Do they not? If they don't, at least get basic documents in place. If they do have one, spend some time in that first year while working with them, just reviewing and making sure it aligns with their life, right? I mean, our job as financial planners, make sure their money aligns with their life, but also their estate plan, right? I mean, why build all of these assets, do all these great things for it not to flow through the way that you want? I think it's then to start thinking about some of the gifting strategies, see how much of their exemption they've used, if they're higher net worth, evaluate some of the trust structures they have, see if it makes sense. Is it time to maybe, change some of those, bring in new trust? Is it you've used your exemption? Is it time to start to think about grats? Look back on 529s and super funding. I think it's kind of just checking off all of those boxes, but then making sure that this isn't just a one-time thing, right? I think a lot of people go to an estate planning attorney and they think they're done. But as an advisor working with them on a yearly basis, at least every couple of years, taking a look at this and making sure things are right, because they do become outdated quick. Sometimes parents pass away, siblings pass away, kids pass away, you lose relationships with some of these people, you move states. These are all reasons where you might want to revisit and change the estate plan. It's kind of our job to push people into taking that action that we know most people are like, don't really want to spend the fee. It's probably fine. When in reality, it might not be, and it might be worth paying that fee to make those changes.
Thomas, something that you said earlier, which to me is just like a natural, very frequent touch point, can just be, let's look at the funding. You have a trust. Have you done the homework that we set out for you 3 months ago, last quarter, to put X bank account into your trust, right? Even that conversation, like you're bringing value to the client. Yes, you're nagging at them a little bit, but you're using estate planning as like a touch point to get to know and figure out where the client is.
Well, and I think as a practical point here too, is like chip away at this. Like I tell all my clients, like your job is not in between this quarter and next to get every single thing in the trust, right? The thing is, let's start with like bank accounts, and then let's go to your brokerage accounts. And then maybe we would have started with your house and your business or something, but let's just chunk away at this. And if in 2 years, every single thing is done and funded, that's a win to me. It's not a 3 to 6 month thing.
Exactly. So
cool.
Well, thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, always fun doing these with you, Anne. It was nice to kind of switch it up and lead this one. But everybody, again, thank you for listening. Please rate, subscribe, and we will see you back for another great episode here in a couple weeks.